Hello, my friend, and welcome to this story. Today, I will tell you about a man who changed the world. A man who went from a small village to prison and finally to the presidency of his country. This is the story of Nelson Mandela. Mandela was born in 1918 in a small village in South Africa. His family was not rich. He was just a boy who loved to play, run in the fields, and listen to stories told by the elders. But even as a child, Mandela noticed something strange. The country was divided. People with white skin had power. People with black skin had little or no rights. They could not vote. They could not live where they wanted. They could not even go to the same schools. This system was called apartheid. It was unfair. It was cruel. And it made young Mandela ask himself, why should life be like this? Why can't we all be equal? And here, my friend, let me pause for a moment. Because as you listen to Mandela's story, you are also improving your English. If you want more stories like this, true, powerful, and easy to follow, make sure you subscribe and stay with me. Every story is a new chance to grow your English and your mind. Now let's return. Those questions stayed in Mandela's heart. And one day they would push him to fight for freedom. When Mandela grew older, he left his small village. He went to the city to study. It was the first time he saw the full picture of life under apartheid. In the city, he noticed clear signs everywhere. Whites only. Blacks not allowed. On buses, in restaurants, in schools, the division was everywhere. Mandela studied law. He wanted to understand rules, rights, and justice. But the more he learned, the more he saw how unfair the system was. One day, he watched a policeman shout at an old man. The man had done nothing wrong. His only mistake was the color of his skin. Mandela felt anger rise inside him. He thought, this cannot continue. Someone must stand up. At university, Mandela met other young men who felt the same. They talked for hours about freedom, equality, and the future. Some were afraid. Some were ready to fight. Mandela listened, learned, and began to dream of a free South Africa. But dreaming was not enough. Action was needed. And soon Mandela would take his first steps as a young leader. Mandela became a lawyer. He worked to help poor black families who had no power in court. Many times they could not pay him. But Mandela did not care about money. He cared about justice. Still, the laws were against them. The system was built to keep black South Africans weak and silent. Every case reminded Mandela of one truth. Apartheid had to end. In the 1940s, Mandela joined the African National Congress, also called the ANC. It was a group of men and women who wanted freedom and equality. First, their fight was peaceful. They organized protests, wrote petitions, and gave speeches. They hoped the government would listen. But the government did not listen. Instead, it became more cruel. New laws made life even harder. Black South Africans had to carry passbooks to move from place to place. If they forgot their passbook, they could be arrested. Mandela's heart burned with anger. He told himself, we cannot live as prisoners in our own land. We must resist. And so, Nelson Mandela began to rise as a leader. Not just a lawyer. Not just a student. But a voice for his people. By the 1950s, Nelson Mandela was no longer just a young lawyer. He was becoming a symbol of resistance. He spoke at meetings in halls and on the streets. Crowds gathered to hear him. His words were strong but also full of hope. He said, we want freedom. We want equality. We want to live as human beings. For many South Africans, Mandela's voice gave courage. They saw him as a leader who was not afraid to stand tall. But the government saw him as a threat. They followed him. They arrested him many times. They tried to silence him. Mandela was banned from public speaking. He was forced to move secretly from place to place. But even then, he continued his work. The more the government tried to stop him, the stronger his message became. Mandela understood one thing clearly. If we want real change, we must be ready to sacrifice. And soon his sacrifice would be greater than he could ever imagine. By the early 1960s, South Africa was in crisis. The system of apartheid grew harsher each year. Peaceful protests were broken with violence. Families were separated. Innocent men and women were beaten or killed for demanding basic rights. Mandela and his comrades in the ANC realized something. Peaceful petitions were not enough. The government was deaf to words. It only answered with force. So the ANC created a new wing of resistance. It was called Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation. Its goal was not to harm innocent people, but to sabotage buildings, railways, and symbols of apartheid. Mandela helped to lead it. The government called him a terrorist. The people called him a freedom fighter. In 1962, Mandela was captured. He was taken to court. The trial became famous around the world. Mandela did not deny his actions. Instead, he used the courtroom as a stage. He stood tall and said, "I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society, in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." His words echoed across South Africa. They inspired millions. But they also sealed his fate. The court sentenced Mandela to life in prison. He was just 46 years old, and many thought his story was over. But in truth, it was only beginning. Nelson Mandela was sent to Robben Island, a small prison on the sea near Cape Town. It was a place for the most dangerous prisoners, cut off from the world. The conditions were cruel. Mandela and the others were forced to break stones under the hot African sun. Their rooms were small, cold, and bare. The food was poor. Letters from family were rare. Visits were short and watched closely by guards. For many men, prison would break their spirit. But Mandela was different. Even behind bars, he remained a leader. He studied every day. He encouraged others to learn. He said, "Prison is also a school. We will use this time to prepare." Mandela taught younger prisoners about law, history, and politics. He listened to their fears and gave them hope. When guards tried to humiliate him, he stood tall, never showing weakness. The outside world began to hear his name. International groups demanded his release. Songs were written. Posters were made. Nelson Mandela, the prisoner, was becoming Nelson Mandela, the symbol of freedom. Still, the years passed slowly. 10 years. 15 years. 20 years. Mandela grew older, his hair turned gray. But his spirit never broke. He once said, "They can imprison my body, but they cannot imprison my mind." For 27 years, Mandela lived as a prisoner. But inside, he was preparing for the day he would walk free again. While Mandela sat in his cell, the world outside was moving. In South Africa, the system of apartheid was still strong. But the people's anger was growing. Protests filled the streets. Workers refused to obey unfair laws. Students marched with courage, even when soldiers stood against them. And outside South Africa, the world was watching. Countries began to speak out. The United Nations condemned apartheid. Nations placed sanctions on South Africa. No trade, no weapons, no support. Musicians, athletes, and movie stars joined the call. They sang songs with one name: Free Nelson Mandela. The name of a man behind bars had become a cry for freedom across the globe. Inside prison, Mandela heard news in small pieces. A guard whispered something. A visitor shared a few words. He knew the world had not forgotten him. And the South African government felt the pressure. They could keep Mandela locked up, but they could not silence his message. The more they tried to bury his voice, the louder it grew. By the 1980s, things were changing fast. The economy was weak. The people were restless. The world was united against apartheid. The government faced a choice: continue the system and risk collapse, or make peace and start a new future. Behind the prison walls, Mandela waited. He had patience. He had faith. And he knew his time was coming. On the morning of February 11, 1990, the gates of Victor Verster prison slowly opened. Crowds had gathered outside. People climbed trees, stood on rooftops, and held banners that said, "Welcome home, Mandela." And then at last he appeared. Nelson Mandela. He was older now, with gray hair and deep lines on his face. But his walk was steady, his back was straight, and his smile was full of strength. Beside him, his wife Winnie held his hand. Together, they walked out of prison after 27 long years. The people cheered. Some cried. Some sang freedom songs. The world watched on television. Mandela raised his fist in the air. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the power of a nation's hope. He spoke to the people soon after. His words were calm yet strong. "I stand before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. Your tireless and heroic sacrifices have made it possible for me to be here today. I therefore place the remaining years of my life in your hands." The crowd roared with joy. The man who had been locked away for decades was now free, but freedom was only the first step. The real challenge was just beginning. Mandela would now have to guide South Africa from division and hate to unity and democracy. Mandela was free at last, but South Africa was still trapped in a storm. Apartheid was not gone yet. The laws of separation were still written in books. The police still patrolled the streets. The people were divided by anger and fear. Some wanted peace. Some wanted revenge. The country stood at a crossroads. And in the middle stood Nelson Mandela. Instead of calling for violence, he called for peace. He said, "Let us forget the past and build a future together." It was not easy. Many of his people were angry. They had suffered too long. They wanted to fight back. But Mandela reminded them, "If we answer hate with hate, we will remain slaves forever. True freedom means peace, justice, and unity for all." He began secret talks with the government. First they were slow, filled with mistrust. But step by step, walls of fear began to fall. In 1993, Mandela and President F.W. de Klerk stood together and announced South Africa would hold its first democratic elections. Every man and woman, black and white, would finally have the right to vote. For this courage, both men received the Nobel Peace Prize. But for Mandela, the greatest reward was still to come. April 1994. It was a day the people of South Africa had waited for their whole lives. For the first time in history, black and white citizens would stand side by side and cast their votes as equals. The lines at the polling stations stretched for miles. Old women who had never voted in their entire lives walked for hours to place a mark on a piece of paper. Young men and women stood proudly, knowing they were shaping a new nation. Some cried, some sang, some simply smiled, unable to believe that the day had finally come. And when the votes were counted, the result was clear. Nelson Mandela had won. The boy from the small village, the lawyer who defended the powerless, the prisoner who had lost 27 years of his life. That man was now the president of South Africa. On May 10, 1994, Mandela stood in Pretoria at his inauguration. World leaders gathered. Crowds filled the streets. He spoke to the nation with a voice full of strength and forgiveness. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will experience the oppression of one by another. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. The people cheered. The world celebrated. And South Africa entered a new chapter. Mandela was no longer just a prisoner or a symbol. He was the president of a free nation. Nelson Mandela's presidency was not easy. South Africa was free, yes, but the wounds of apartheid were still deep. Black families were poor. Schools were unequal. And many people still carried anger in their hearts. Mandela knew this. And he knew that true freedom was not only about votes. It was about unity. It was about learning to live together. He worked to heal the nation. He created programs to bring education and hope to the poor. He encouraged business and investment to rebuild the economy. And most of all, he promoted forgiveness. One of his most powerful tools was sports. In 1995, South Africa hosted the Rugby World Cup. Rugby was loved by white South Africans, but for many black citizens, it was a symbol of division. Mandela saw an opportunity. He wore the green jersey of the national team, the same jersey many of his people disliked. He stood on the field before the final match, smiling, waving, showing unity. And when South Africa won, the whole stadium shouted, "Nelson! Nelson! Nelson!" For one moment, black and white South Africans celebrated together. It was a picture of the new South Africa Mandela dreamed of. He served only one term as president. He could have stayed longer. But Mandela believed in democracy. He stepped down after 5 years, showing the world that real leaders serve, not rule forever. By the time he left office, Mandela was not only a hero to his people, he was a hero to the world. When Nelson Mandela stepped away from the presidency, he did not step away from his mission. He continued to fight for peace, for human rights, and for children's education. The world honored him. He received awards, statues, and the love of millions. But Mandela always remained humble. He often said, "I am not a saint, unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying." Mandela lived until 2013. When he passed away, the world cried. Leaders, kings, presidents, and ordinary people all came together. They remembered a man who had walked from prison to the presidency, not with hate, but with forgiveness. His story teaches us something powerful, that courage can defeat fear, that patience can defeat injustice, and that forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. Mandela once said, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." And here you are, my friend, learning English, improving yourself, step by step. Remember, every small effort builds a bigger future. Mandela's journey was long and painful, but he never gave up. And neither should you. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope it inspired you, and also gave you a chance to practice your English. If you want more true stories of leaders, dreamers, and heroes, don't forget to subscribe and join me again. Because each story is not just about history, it's also about you, your growth, and your journey to fluency. Keep learning, keep believing, and remember the lesson of Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it is done.